What's up, you guys? It's indie scientist Kenyo here. I'm just a man with ideas, researching the truth. Today we have Sabine H, famous scientist. She's at the Institute of Art and Ideas, talking about if particles don't exist at all, which is fascinating because I think they do, but they don't. But let's get into it.
Vibration in the field. We don't have to postulate a metaphysical other thing. Which
No
is the
physicists, no serious physicists. I don't think there's any serious physical theory that says that. People speak loosely that way, but it doesn't make any sense. So you can't think of particles as fluctuations of fields if the fields aren't in space-time.
There's fields and particles as a separate sort of.
Sure.
There are always different ways to look at the same thing, so it doesn't really make sense
She looks so relaxed. She's dressed so chill.
to say that the particle is the thing that is real if there's another description that's exactly as good but doesn't have the particle.
That was too. I didn't catch the sound bites there. So
Once we thought we knew that they were atoms, and then it became protons and neutrons, and now we're talking about quarks. And
it's a little funny to me that by identifying the smaller bodies inside the bodies, we then somehow deem the actual bodies to not be whole things anymore. We're like, oh, it's not an atom. It's not a molecule anymore because it's made out of atoms. Oh, it's not an atom anymore because it's made out of proton and electron. And it's like, okay, yeah, sort of, barely. Those are like detectable parts, but it's like, that's like saying like, oh, you're not a human anymore. It's like, oh, you're just like a heart and a stomach. It's like, well, I was like, oh, it's not a car anymore. It's an engine and a carburetor. I don't know what a carburetor is, to be honest with you, but I don't think that being able to distinguish the parts lets you know what, exactly what you should be calling a whole or a body of some sort. I consider, in my hypothesis, just my own little things that I'm thinking about right now, I think that atoms are solid things. I think we've just individual solid things. I think that we've discovered, of course, that they're made up of different things, but just because, let's say you have a certain atom, I don't know what element this is, 8, that's oxygen, right? 8 protons, eight neutrons, and you have 8 electrons or whatever, however many you have at the time. 8 probably. But does that make it less of an oxygen or something like that? No, it's still a distinct body. But anyway, sorry, I've stopped way too long.
And so the real question is basically, what makes a particle a particle? Like, at what point do we give it a name and say, okay, this is a thing, as it were? And I think, Hilary, you referred to this as the sort of, there's no end to these Chinese boxes. So what do you reckon? At what point do we say that something is a thing?
Yeah. Well, I think, just to pick up on what Tim was saying there, I think the way that he described that is, we've got these different accounts. We've got the particles, we've got fields. Then as an underlying thing, we could have spin networks, we could have strings, whatever. And there's an idea that science usually operates with a rhetoric of, well, we're trying to find the right answer. And of course, that's right. We're trying to find the best account. But the point I would want to make is, you're not going to get to a final account. That's not what's going on. Of course, you can always try and improve account, but usually the notion is that we're getting better, we're getting closer. And I don't think that's what's going on.
He's kind of saying the same thing as me. It's like, okay, you keep finding different layers. Is it the cell? Okay, I'm made out of cells. You're not a human, you're just a bunch of cells.
It's, you can have a certain way of holding the world, and you can apply that, and you can interpret it in that light. And you try and make it work, and you can then have another one which achieves slightly different things, works in a slightly different way, enables you to intervene within that model. And Hawking came to the view in 2012 in his book that we operate within a model theoretic realism, as he put it. And what he
One thing I also think is that particles are actually just a 6th-dimensional perspective of the universe. And so I agree with what he's saying. It's like, okay, you can look at things from the 6th-dimensional perspective, 4th dimensional, 3rd dimensional. You can look at them. Anyway, that's just me.
Meant by that is that we operate within frameworks, theoretical models, and we can't get beyond those models. We can't somehow escape from the model to describe what's ultimately out there. So we should not imagine that at one day you or your children or your grandchildren are going to be told there's one version of what's going on out there, there's really fields, or there's really information, or there's really whatever it is. There will always be a variety of different models, and none of them reach through to say what the world is ultimately like.
I feel like both of you
Well,
should have a strong opinion
looks
about
like
that. I mean,
You want me to? Well,
yeah, go on.
So-
Tim.
they're theories, right? They're proposals, they're hypotheses. You want them to be clearly articulated. Sometimes they're not.
What's that guy on the right there?
Some articulated theories postulate their particles, some postulate their fields, some postulate their strings. Okay. Then the question is, what kind of evidence could we have that might make one of these plausible? And can we ever get, so let me just, historically, there was a thing called the parton model, which we now call the quark
Tim.
model. And initially, when Murray Gell-Mann
the
developed
other guy
it,
then?
he's very clear. He said, this is just math. This is just kind of a math, there's a
he said-
mathematical, we were finding all these particles. I can organize them mathematically by postulating, as it were, these purely mathematical quarks. Then he later was convinced, no, quarks actually exist. What convinced him? Deep inelastic scattering results from the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. You just take electrons and whack protons really hard with them, and you notice that they're coming out as if they're 3-point-like scattering centers. So you have to look at any of these theories. What's the evidence? Sometimes the evidence becomes so overwhelming. We now know the moon is made of rock. We know it, right? Aristotle didn't know it. He thought it was made of ether. Why? We now have better evidence. So you have to ask, how good evidence can you have for these theories? And then you have to go theory by theory and see what does it predict and so on. We have pretty good reason to believe that it's not Chinese boxes forever. We have really good reason to believe that electrons are not made of anything else. Why? Because the electromagnetic form factor that goes into the scattering predictions. I mean, there's technical reasons for this.
We have pretty good reasoning for that at all. Honestly, I think we have extremely limited resolution at a scale. I think at the very least, honestly, this is just my thoughts again. I think at the very least, there might be some sort of neutrino inside of the electron. Sounds weird, but not that weird. We know that neutrons are kind of like protons with electrons inside of them, and I kind of have an idea that maybe it is just a proton and a neutron. It's like a time-traveling proton and a neutron. Anyway, let's see what they say.
So this kind of very general high-level skepticism, I think, is inappropriate when you have definite theories and you're asking for definite reasons to believe them.
Does that chime reasonably for you?
Yeah, broadly speaking, it's reasonable, though one could say we don't yet have evidence that electrons are made of anything. I think it might be interesting to some people to know that it isn't all that easy to take the fundamental particles that we currently use in the standard model and just say they're made of something else. There's a fairly simple reason for this, which is if they're made of something else, then the constituent particles have to have smaller masses than the things that they combine to. But particles that have small masses would have been discovered long ago. So if one tries to, because particle colliders produce all particles below the energy of the collision generically. So you have to somehow get around this problem.
Okay, first of all, let me remind you guys, I'm not an expert on this, but I don't know if that would be necessarily true. Only because there's a bunch of different reasons, but and I don't really know exactly what they're able to detect from particle colliders. So maybe I'm wrong, but I do think maybe there could be something, sub-resolution, something that they're not able to detect. Though I might be wrong. I don't know how well they can detect neutrinos with particle colliders. I'm going to look that up actually after this. But
And there are few possibilities to get this done. One is to say, well, they interact very rarely or very weakly. Then you can do it. And the other things to say is kind of similar as it is with the strong nuclear force, which is that they are bound together very strongly, and it takes a lot of energy to pull them apart. So this is why we don't have quarks floating around
super strong
individually, but they're bound together in neutrons and protons. So that said, I think I kind of agree and disagree with both of you. I think it's right, of course. We call a thing a particle if we have evidence for it, and we have mathematics to explain this evidence, and then we can define something that we say, well, this is a particle. So this is my instrumentalist view on things, but that doesn't necessarily.
I'm going to be honest. They are at the Institute of Art and Ideas, so I shouldn't be complaining. I consider myself an artist as well. But as far as a science conversation, I think that they're getting very philosophical and almost semantic right now. But that's fine.
Necessarily mean that this is the only way we can talk about it. There are actually quite interesting examples in the foundations of physics where you can have two completely different mathematical formulations that give you the same predictions for observables. Let's call it a duality. Maybe the best known duality is the area of CFT duality that I don't want to talk about in great detail because then I'll still be talking in tomorrow hours. But broadly speaking, it means that we can try to
I don't know what that is.
Explain what we see in a particle collision as a sort of gravity theory in a space with one dimension more. So it's a completely different thing. And the important thing about this is that the stuff that is a
Mind you, I already am on gravity being the fifth dimension, but if everyone wants to stall that, that's fine. I'm just joking. I'm sure there's very good reasons for the hesitancy.
particle for us in the laboratory is no longer a particle in this other description, which is mathematically exactly as valid. So I think that is kind of a physics example that.
And I also think that clearly, I think I was thinking about this earlier today, in like science, and then as science gains its distance from engineering, it becomes very interesting. But I mean, it always opens the door for new engineering. But anyway, I just think that the approach can sometimes lose its intensity a little bit when it gets a little bit too philosophical.
Supports your point that there are always different ways to look at the same thing. So it doesn't really make sense to say that the particle is the thing that is real if there's another description that's.
What I was going to say is that also, does it matter? Does it really matter? But it does matter because they're going to get into that. They're just doing a little scientist do-si-do, I think.
Exactly as good, but doesn't have the particles.
And just to pick up on a point you're making, Sabina, though, which is really exactly along the lines that I was arguing, which is that many of you might imagine that if you think of an electron, you probably have a picture of those drawings. You have a sort of atom in the middle, and the electron somehow going around the outside like a ball. But of course, there are plenty of circumstances where scientists are not thinking of it as a particle going round like that, but it's a probability space in which there's no particle to be found anywhere at all in that probability space as such. It is found in a particular place as a result of you observing it. Now, furthermore, what is this particle? If you imagine it, if you think of the electron as a particle, well,
So I think in that type of thing, scientists have started to get like a little vague as far as in communicating what they mean by observe something, right? Which is why I think we get so deep into like consciousness and relating that to physics. A little unnecessary. They don't really mean observe it. They just mean to take a picture of it. So at an instance, um, the electron is in one location, right? But even that, I've started to think in my own personal hypothesis is, yes, interesting, but maybe it's just like, it depends how you're trying to interact with it, right? So it's just like, yes, in this type of way, at this energy level, this thing is here. In general, I think if you look at an atom, you'd probably just see a simple sphere, The cloud might look like a atmosphere or something like that, or maybe just a solid shell. And then you'll have or maybe nothing at all. And then you'd have the proton. Obviously, it's super tiny, way inside there. That electron shell probability cloud around it, though, would make up a big bulk of that thing. I mean, I don't know if you could say look at an atom, but it's just it's a solid it's a thing. Whatever you want to call it, it's a knot in energy, it's a massian. I just made that up. Just a mass particle. Massian's not real.
in field theory, we see that particle as a vibration in a field. That's what it is in terms of Einsteinian physics. We don't really think of it in terms of particles anymore. We think it in terms of fields. But what is that?
Also, in my hypothesis, electrons are one-dimensional. So, and then protons would be at the very least three-dimensional, maybe a little bit more than that. But yeah, so it's like, how does a one-dimensional thing interact with a three-dimensional thing? When the frame rate is 3 or 4 dimensions, I'm not really sure what I guess it would be 3 dimensions. When the frame rate is 3 dimensions, I think that's kind of responsible for the concept of the probability cloud.
What is that vibration in the force field, the electromagnetic force field? And the point that I'm making, which is allied really with the things that Sabin is saying, is that we can hold these different models for understanding what's going on, and some of them are very, very powerful, and we can try and improve them in the light of our experiments. But we shouldn't imagine that somehow we can get to the bottom of that. It's not like
He's trying to be a little diplomatic right now. He's like, hey, who's wrong? Everybody's wrong. Everybody's right.
Deep mystery that there's a weird thing that it's both a wave and a particle, for example. It's just they're different ways of holding that stuff. And I think you can explore both of them. And we shouldn't necessarily imagine that we can have a single answer, because there isn't a single answer. The world isn't made of bits that might have answers like that.
Interesting. Okay.
So, yeah, let me intervene here.
It's getting a little weirdly excited, though. I don't think that that's really true. I mean, we might not know what the world is made out of, but there are answers out there. We just don't have them.
So there's a claim made that the again,
and we sort of have some of them, a little bit.
Forgive me for a minute. ADS-CFT is supposed to be an example of, as it were, equivalent, mathematically equivalent, empirically equivalent, I don't know, equivalent in some ways, formulations of a theory that give you entirely different pictures of what the world is made of, yes? ADS-CFT is a conjecture. It's not proved. Nobody's proven it. I don't know if you can prove it. Nobody has proven it. There are these tiny little mathematical suggestions. If you take different theories out to various infinite limits, you get similar. Okay, but it's not proven. It's just not.
He's really going at Sabin's philosophical approach here, which is kind of funny, though, because Sabin's whole thing was like, oh, science is getting too wonky. but I sometimes feel that she's a bit wonky. But anyway.
Not true that you can say, oh, here are two equivalent ways of describing the same thing. That is a conjecture. Even if it were true, we have that all the time in physics, and we don't think they have to be equal. So Lorentz had an understanding of space-time where there's absolute simultaneity. Einstein got rid of it, but you can prove in their applications they make the same predictions. Nobody thinks they're the same theory, right? There's different theories. So, you know, this idea that, oh, of course, if you can describe it this way, then you can describe it that way. We actually do not have lots of examples or, you know, examples of that. And then you have to think hard, if you have alternative theories, what the evidence is that makes one more plausible than another. It's not a matter of proof, but it's a matter of plausibility.
Okay. I mean, so
He's taking the hard line that, you know, which so far his approach is the only one that makes any sense. Mr. What's his name? Tim Maudlin. I think Sabin's is just like kind of hyper skeptical of anything, which doesn't really make that much sense if we're going to do science at all. And then the dude, if his name is Hillary Lawson, then maybe I'm just confused. But I guess he could be Hillary. I didn't see when they showed his name. Those are the only 3 names it says here. But anyway, he's also just kind of being vague because he's playing both sides of the fence. But this guy's just saying, like, listen, we have reasonable explanations of certain things that get us good predictions. We have lots of different ones, and they work the best. The little issues between them is not the whole picture, which I agree with. I mean, focus on what you know and improve that. And certain people will have different ideas and they'll try to add on. You add your idea. And like with me, I create ideas and I add them in. But I'm not going to sit around and say, oh, my ideas are right just because I had them. They're just ideas. Until I prove better something than somebody else, whatever proves the best results, whatever's the most predictable, gets to reign over its territory. You know what I mean? In science, at least.
So I'm curious, I mean, so the picture that I'm getting right now, I don't know about you guys, is that it seems to me that this idea of particles is something that can be useful. And if there's evidence for it, then we can hold it to be true. So evidence seems to be important, but also there's this idea that the way in which that it has a function for how we think about things and how we can proceed through the sort of scientific endeavors and the phenomena that we're trying to explain. But at the start, we also mentioned that we were going to talk about fields. So Tim, can I just ask you to sort of give us an explanation of what's the difference basically between a particle and a field? And so if particles are a little bit, some particles have evidence, others don't, does that mean that they are?
I'm super curious who at the Institute of Art and Ideas put this panel together. Just a side note.
Are instead fields, or that we should be thinking about fields?
Okay,
what's going on with that?
so let's start with some definitions. A particle is always somewhere. A field is always everywhere, right? Just classically, electromagnetic field classically is postulated at every point in space and time it has a value. A particle is always somewhere, and typically what people mean by a particle is more than that, that its trajectory through space-time is continuous. You don't think of particles as discontinuously jumping around, okay? All right, so particles are not fields. Fields.
I mean, there's something called quantum tunneling, but I guess it's continuous in some sort of way.
Are not particles. Electromagnetic fields we're familiar with from classical physics. They were postulated, very useful. Particles have been postulated, very useful. As the quote from Bell that I read is from John Bell, is that we have phenomena like little dots appearing on screens. And certainly one handy thing for explaining that phenomenon is to think there was a little invisible thing that pretty much hit the screen there and caused this flash or this emulsion or whatever. Now, it's not the only possible explanation, but it's a pretty reasonable one. So yeah, particles and fields are different, and you should be clear about what you're postulating.
So are you saying, so there are 2 things going on here. When we try and picture the electron, you're saying there's the particle, which is the electron, and there's the field, which is the electromagnetic field.
Well, classically there is. And quantum mechanically, you can have particles and then what is represented by the wave function, which is a different non-classical.
Wait a second, who's this guy then? For some reason I thought he was a scientist, but I don't know who he is now.
kind of postulated entity.
But don't, I mean, in the context of field theory, don't we just think of the particle is just a vibration in the field? We don't have to postulate a metaphysical other thing. Which is
No serious physicist. I don't think there's any serious physical theory that says that. People speak loosely that way, but it doesn't make any sense. I mean, there are vibrations in electromagnetic fields because they're local things. You can ask of electromagnetic field, a classical electromagnetic field, what is it here? What is it here? Is it fluctuating here? Is it fluctuating there? In quantum theory, the field-like thing is the wave function. It's not even definable in space-time. So you can't think of particles as fluctuations of fields if the fields aren't in space-time.
Okay, so within
something?
Einstein, you know, there's fields and particles as a separate.
Sabine was already feeling dejected, and this guy blowing her off is going to make her an even grumpier Sabine than I think the internet is used to. Not here, probably, but it's going to come out at some point.
Sort of
Sure. I mean, that's a classical theory, of
I
course.
think we're confusing two different fields. Like there's the classical field, the electromagnetic field, and then there's the quantum field. There's the vacuum of the quantum field, and the particles are excitations over the quantum field of the vacuum. So this is why physicists talk about this as excitations over something. And this is very similar to what I was talking about earlier with the quasi-particles, where you can think of the material as kind of the background. And over that background, you have excitations, which are kind of sound waves, for example, is a simple example. You know, so you have a bunch of an excitation that travels locally. It's in some place, okay? So you can see it going along. And then a quantum field theory case, the background is just the vacuum. And then you have these excitations over the vacuum, which is kind of, this is why I say it's kind of suggestive with the quasi-particles, that maybe they're also made of something else, but this is where this idea comes from.
So just so I'm very clear on this, you're sort of suggesting that there's, in the field view of the universe, there's a field, and then what we can think of as particles, let's say, or where we might think of defining something as being a particle, is where something's happening to the field, that there's some sort of movement in the field. Right. So it's a bit like the ocean, basically. Yeah, exactly. So the peak of the wave is kind of where we might look with a different lens. Amazing, love this.
Him is shaking his head. Let's see what they say, because I mean, I'd never heard Sabine's particular take on it, though it kind of makes some sense to me in a certain kind of way, though I think it's similar. Man, I'll say this though, it does align with my concept of particles being six-dimensional. But let's see what Tim says.
Not the way it is.
Okay,
I'm
good.
sorry. You're giving a very classical picture of a field. Yes, a classical field is local. Electromagnetic field, it's local. You can take a little, you say, what is it here? What is it here? Right? It's a local thing. Quantum mechanics doesn't, I mean, the quantum field, the wave function, just isn't defined on physical space. It's not like that.
Does that mean that you can't measure it? Is that what you're saying?
Measure it. Well, measure it is a matter of finding some interactions that you think give you information about the physical values of various variables.
Which you can't.
Of course,
do.
you can. You can. I mean, you can check all kinds of things in the lab. I mean, the point is that classical fields are local objects. They're what John Bell called local beables. You can just pick out a little region of space-time and ask, what is it there? What is it there? You can specify it here independently of anywhere else. The quantum wave function just mathematically isn't like that. You can't understand it that way. You can't. Mathematically, you can't understand it that way. Okay, it's a new thing. But the quantum wave function is a very different thing than a classical field.
Okay, so we have two different kinds of field. I mean, Sabina, you kind of said that as well, and Hillary, I feel like this talks to your point.
They dropping
to
up.
continue watching.
No, we're good there. That was really cool. I have to say, it did bring me to one new question. I'd never really heard that many descriptions of the quantum field in that type of way. And I kind of wonder where the confusion is. So I'm gonna have to tie up my knowledge there a little bit, but it does tie into some different ideas. So, do particles exist? I think yeah, as far as we know, we can use the concept of a particle to describe things. What else does it need to mean? It's a particle, a little part. It's almost Jamaican. A little part. All right, you guys. I'm gonna go ahead and get off, but I hope you enjoyed that, and join me for the next Indie Scientist Reacts. See you soon.